The pod smelled like death before he even touched it. Joran Vask crouched in the dirt of Keth Station's outer market, where the ceiling leaked recycled air that tasted like old metal, and the lights buzzed at a frequency designed to make you feel like you were running out of time. He was. 46 hours left before the docking authority would seize the rustword and auction it off to cover his unpaid fees. 3 credits in his pocket. A cracked scanner that lied more than it told the truth. And all around him, the glittering wreckage of 1,000 dead ships spread out in piles that stretched from one end of the market to the other. He was not having a good week. The pod was at the bottom of a dead tech heap near the back wall. It was about the size of a large storage crate, made from a dark metal he did not recognize, covered in markings that his scanner tried to read and then gave up on with a quiet little whine. The shape was wrong in a way that made his eyes want to slide off it. Too many angles, not enough symmetry. Whatever species had built it, they did not think about space the same way humans did. He would have walked right past it, except that his cracked scanner blinked once, showed the number 0.4, and then went dark again. He tapped it against his palm. It stayed dark. He looked at the pod again. A Vreth dealer named Goss was watching him from behind a pile of broken engine parts. Goss was tall, dry-skinned, with 4 arms, and the permanent expression of someone who had seen everything the universe had to offer and found it disappointing. He sold broken things for parts. He liked humans about as much as he liked unscheduled rain. "You are looking at that pod," Goss said. "I am," Joran said. "It is dead." The station scanner ran a full biological check. No life signs. The cryofluid is crystallized solid. Whatever was in it has been frozen for a long time. "How long?" Goss made a sound that might have been a shrug. "Long." Joran crouched down and put his hand against the pod's surface. It was cold. Very cold, even through his glove. But there was something about the way the cold felt. Not dead cold, not empty cold, but the kind of cold that comes from something being held very carefully, at a precise temperature, for a very specific reason. "1 credit, Goss said. "I am selling it for 1 credit because it takes up space, and I am tired of looking at it." Joran stood up. He had 3 credits. He needed all 3 of them for the docking fee, which was already short by about 40 credits, so none of it mattered anyway. He paid 1 credit and dragged the pod out of the heap himself, because Goss refused to help. Getting it back to the rustword was not elegant. The pod weighed far more than it looked like it should, which told Joran something interesting about the metal it was made from. He borrowed a loader cart from a vendor who owed him a small favor, rolled the pod through the crowded lower corridors of Keth Station, and took 3 wrong turns because the station's layout was designed by someone who apparently had no fondness for straight lines. By the time he got the pod into the rustword's cargo bay and sealed the outer door, he was sweating through his jacket, and his back was making a sound it had no business making. He stood in the cargo bay and looked at the pod. The rustword was a small ship. It had started life as a survey vessel and been through 4 owners before Joran, each of whom had modified it in ways that made less and less sense the more you looked at them. The cargo bay was maybe 10 meters long and 6 wide. The pod sat in the middle of it like a blunt statement. It was still cold. His breath made small clouds in the air around it. He pulled out his scanner, tapped it twice, and pointed it at the pod. The scanner made a noise he had not heard it make before. Not the usual flat beep of a dead reading. Something more like a hesitation. It showed him a string of numbers that did not add up to anything sensible, then cleared itself and showed him that same number again, 0.4. Joran sat down on a cargo crate and looked at the number for a while. 0.4 was not 0. 0 was dead. 0 was empty. 0 was what Goss's station scanner had apparently read, and what every sensible person would accept and move on from. 0.4 was something that a broken scanner showed you when it was either malfunctioning or detecting something so faint and so strange that it did not know how to classify it. He got up and walked around the pod slowly. It had a seam running along the upper third. A manual release panel on the left side, half buried under what looked like old impact scoring. The markings on its surface were not decorative. They were functional. He could tell because they were clustered around areas that would logically be controls or readouts, not spread evenly across the whole surface for aesthetics. He pressed his ear against the pod's surface. He was not expecting anything. He was tired, and stressed, and probably not thinking clearly. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, the way a person does when they have nothing to lose and want to feel like they are doing something. And he heard it. It was so faint that he thought at first it was his own heartbeat, or the sound of the station's ventilation system vibrating through the hull. But it had a pattern, a rhythm that was not a heartbeat and not a ventilation system. It was slower than both. Deliberate. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, pause. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, pause. He pulled back and stared at the pod. He pressed his ear to it again, moving to a different section. The sound was there too, just barely. Not mechanical, not automated. Something was making that sound from inside. Something that was choosing to make it, in a pattern, over and over. Joran had been a salvager for 11 years. He had cracked open dead ships and picked through the remains of 100 different species machines and tools and personal items. He had a practical and somewhat unsentimental relationship with the concept of life and the concept of death and the large gray area between them. He understood, at a professional level, that something appearing dead and something being dead were two very different things. He went to the Rustward's small equipment locker and pulled out a handheld resonance amplifier that he normally used to check hull plating for microfractures. He pressed it flat against the pod's surface and activated it at its lowest setting. The sound came through clear and unmistakable. It was not Morse code, he had thought, for a moment, that it might be. But the rhythm was wrong for Morse. It was something else entirely, a pattern he did not recognize, in a sequence that repeated perfectly every 43 seconds, and it was coming from a living thing. He stood in the middle of his cargo bay, holding a resonance amplifier against a pod that everything and everyone had told him was dead, and listened to something alive asking, in the only way it could, to be found. He put the amplifier down. He picked it back up. He walked to the ship's communications panel and called the Keth Station Medical Registry to ask what the proper procedure was for reanimating an unknown species from deep cryostasis. The automated system told him to submit a form, wait for a licensed medical officer to review it, and expect a response within 3 to 5 standard working days. He looked at the amplifier in his hand. He looked at the pod. He went back to the cargo bay, crouched in front of the manual release panel, and started looking for a way in. He was not a doctor. He was not a biologist. He was not a xenobiologist or a cryotechnician, or any of the things that a sensible person would want to be in this situation. What he was a man who could take almost anything apart, figure out how it worked, and put it back together in a way that usually functioned. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life fixing things that other people had given up on. He was also, and this mattered more than he would have admitted at the time, a man who had heard something alive asking to be found, and who was constitutionally incapable of walking away from that. He found the manual release at the 3rd attempt. It was recessed behind a panel that looked decorative and wasn't. It required simultaneous pressure on 2 points about 30 centimeters apart, which meant it was designed for something with a wider handspan than his, and he had to use both thumbs and lean in hard before he felt it give. The pod exhaled. Not dramatically, not with great clouds of vapor or theatrical lighting. It just let out a long, slow breath of air that was cold and thin and smelled like something old. The seam along the upper third opened by about 2 centimeters. A soft internal light, dim and amber-colored, bled out through the gap. Joran straightened up and stood very still. From inside the pod, in a voice that was barely more than a thread of sound, something said a single word in a language he did not know. He leaned down close to the gap. "I don't understand you," he said quietly. "But I'm going to get you out, okay? I'm going to get you out." He did not know if it understood him. He did not know if it could hear him. He did not know what he was about to find when he opened that pod the rest of the way, or whether he would be able to help it, or whether helping it would cost him everything he had left. He started working on the seam. His hands were steady. That surprised him a little. He had expected to be afraid, and he was, underneath everything. But his hands were steady, and the work was in front of him, and something alive was waiting, and that was enough to keep moving. The seam took 11 minutes to open fully. Joran had to use a pry bar from the tool rack and then a thin vibration cutter to work through a section that had fused at some point, probably from the same impact that had caused the scoring on the outer panel. He worked carefully and quickly, which are not easy things to do at the same time, and he talked the whole way through because it seemed like the right thing to do. Other two, he narrated what he was doing. He explained each step. He told the pod, and whatever was inside it, that he was making progress, that he was almost through, that he was not going to stop. When the pod finally opened, he was ready for almost anything. She was not what he expected. She was smaller than he had imagined. Curled on her side in a chamber barely large enough to contain her, wrapped in a layer of cryomaterial that had partially deteriorated. Her skin was pale to the point of translucence, a grayish white that might have been a natural color or might have been the effect of cold and time and near death. She had 2 arms, 2 legs, a face that was almost, not quite, human in its proportions. Her features were finer and more angular than a human face, her eyes larger, set slightly wider, currently closed. She had no hair, but the top of her skull had a faint ridge structure that curved back from the brow and gave her head a different shape. She was breathing, barely. Each breath came slow and shallow, and separated by a gap that made Joran count, unconsciously, until the next one came. She was alive. He stood at the edge of the open pod and took one moment, just one, to absorb that fact. Then he started working. The Rustword had no medical bay. What it had was a first aid kit, a warming cabinet used for food storage, a water recycling system, and whatever Joran could improvise from the ship's general supplies. He carried her, and she weighed almost nothing, which was a problem all on its own, to the small crew area, and laid her on the narrow bunk with a heated blanket over her, and a second one folded beneath her for insulation. He rigged a fluid line from the water recycling output, ran it through the food warming cabinet at the lowest heat setting to bring the temperature up without spiking it, and suspended the bag from a hook above the bunk with a line from the IV kit he kept in the first aid box for his own emergencies. It was not proper medical treatment. It was not protocol. If he had described what he was doing to any licensed medical professional, they would have listed the ways it could go wrong in ascending order of seriousness, and then asked him to stop. He did not stop. He sat on the floor of the crew area, with his back against the wall, and his scanner pointed at her, and watched the numbers. Her core temperature came up by 0.5 degrees in the first hour. He noted it. He adjusted the blanket layers. He checked the fluid line. He talked to her in a low, quiet voice, because he had read once, a long time ago, that hearing familiar sounds helped patients in low consciousness states orient themselves toward waking, and while she was not human, and her ear structure was different, and she might not be able to hear him at all, it was the only thing he could do that cost him nothing. He told her his name. He told her the name of the ship. He told her they were docked at Keth Station, and that the station smelled bad, but that his ship smelled only slightly better. He told her he had paid 1 credit for her, which was the best credit he had ever spent, and that she was not allowed to die because he could not afford the medical forms. 3 hours in, she moved. It was just her hand, a small flexing of fingers that pulled at the blanket, but it was deliberate movement, conscious movement. Joran was on his feet before he had decided to stand up. She moved her hand again, and then turned her head, slowly, toward the sound of the ship around her. Her eyes opened halfway. They were a very dark gray, almost black, with a ring of amber color at the outer edge of the iris. She looked at him. He looked at her. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then, very quietly, she said something. He had no idea what language it was. He did not have a translator. He had a cracked universal chip in the first aid kit, the kind sold for emergency communication in border systems. It had not been updated in 4 years, and it covered a limited range of known languages. He picked it up and held it close to her, feeling slightly foolish. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Then she said something again, slowly, and with what seemed like great care, as if she were choosing a frequency she thought his device might recognize. The chip buzzed. The word it produced was one he had not expected. It said, "Fool." She stared at him. He stared at the chip. Then she said something else, and this time the chip gave him 2 words, halting and imperfect, but clear enough. "Thank you." Joran exhaled. He had been holding that breath for about 11 hours without knowing it. "You're welcome," he said. She did not understand him, but she watched his face when he said it, and something in her expression shifted. Not a smile. Not yet. Something quieter and more complicated than a smile. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of someone who has been in the dark for a very long time and is looking at the first light they have seen in longer than they can clearly remember. He refilled the warming bag. He checked the fluid line. He sat back down on the floor. He did not know what she was. He did not know where she had come from, or how long she had been in that pod. He did not know why she was still alive when everything said she should not be. He did not know what finding her was going to mean for either of them. He knew that she was alive, and that she was alive partly because he had not walked away, and that this was enough. It was not until much later, when she was strong enough to stay awake for more than a few minutes, and the universal chip had managed to cobble together something approaching basic communication, that she told him what she was, and what she was carrying. She was Lurin. She said the word quietly, and watched his face for a reaction. He did not react the way she expected. He did not know enough history to react the way she expected. He knew the Lurin the way most working-class salvagers knew any extinct species, as a footnote in a database, a category of antique tech that fetched decent prices if you found it, a name that showed up in old records. She told him they were extinct. She told him about the Kareth Purge, 200 years ago, when the Kareth Dominion had systematically destroyed every Lurin settlement and ship and record they could find, and most of the species with it. She told him she had been in that pod for the entire 200 years, in cryo-sleep so deep that all biological processes had reduced to almost zero. She told him she had been found by 3 other crews before him. All 3 had run their standard scanners, gotten 0 readings, and sold her as dead tech. She looked at his cracked, buzzing, inaccurate scanner. She said something. The chip translated it as, "Your instrument is broken." "Chronically," he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the impression she was reassessing something fundamental about her assumptions. Then she told him the rest. She told him what was encoded in her neural tissue, not metaphorically, but literally, as a biological data storage mechanism that her people had developed for exactly this kind of situation. She told him what the data contained. He listened. When she was done, the crew area was very quiet. "They're still looking," she said. The chip translated it in pieces, choppy but clear enough. "The Kareth. They have been looking for 200 years, for any Lurin survivor, for the data, for the location." Joran looked at the wall of his small, patched, underfinanced ship. "Right," he said. "You understand what this means," she said. It was not a question. "It means," he said slowly, "that I bought a very expensive problem for 1 credit. She watched him. "You could leave me here, on the station. I could find another way." He stood up and walked to the Rustward's navigation console. "We're leaving Keth Station," he said. "You would do this," she said, "for a person you did not know existed 4 hours ago." He pulled up the navigation charts and started looking at routes. "You were alive when everyone said you weren't," he said. "That counts for something, where I come from." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the careful, labored translation of the cracked chip, "Where do you come from?" He told her. She said, "I have never heard of it." "Most people haven't," he said. "We haven't been out here very long." He entered the undocking request, paid the last of his 3 credits toward the fee as a partial gesture that would absolutely not satisfy the docking authority, and felt the Rustward shudder as its single working main thruster began to warm up. Somewhere behind them, on Keth Station, an alarm was probably beginning to sound. The docking authority's automated system would be flagging the unpaid balance and generating a report. And somewhere much farther away, in systems that Joran had not yet thought to be afraid of, a very old and very powerful organization was still running its quiet, patient search for the last loose end of a war it had thought it finished 2 centuries ago. Joran did not know most of this yet. He knew the broad outline. He knew enough. He flew. The first hunter drone appeared on Joran's scope 14 hours after they left Keth Station. He almost missed it. The Rustward sensor suite was not what anyone would call state-of-the-art. It had 2 functioning long-range antennas, 1 mid-range proximity alert that triggered about 40% of the time, and a visual scanner that was very good at finding salvage if you knew how to read its particular kind of wrong. He had learned to read it over 9 years of ownership. So when the mid-range alert did not trigger, but the visual scanner showed him a smear of motion at the edge of its range that repeated in the same position 3 sweeps in a row, he knew what he was looking at. Something was following them, something small, fast, and trying very hard not to be seen. He did not say anything to Ava Say immediately. She was in the crew area, sitting up with effort against a stack of supply containers, working through a bowl of reconstituted ration broth that she had accepted without complaint and consumed with the focused determination of someone whose body was desperately demanding fuel. She had been awake for 6 hours. Her color was still pale but less frightening. Her movements were gaining a steadiness they had not had when she first woke. He ran a quiet calculation in his head. Hunter drone, Kareth design, if that was what it was, and the signal pattern increasingly suggested it was, meant the source ship was somewhere behind it, too far back to show on his sensors yet. The drone would be transmitting their position continuously. It would also be assessing them, cataloging the ship type, the crew complement, if it could determine it, the heading. He had a few options. He could run, which was limited by the Rustward's single working main thruster, and would not outpace a pursuit cruiser for more than an hour. He could change heading, which would buy time, but not much. He could try to communicate, but he did not know the Kareth's hailing protocols, and attempting contact would confirm that he had spotted the drone. Or he could fly badly. He had been doing that for years without trying. He could do it on purpose, he told Ava Say. He walked back to the crew area, crouched down so he was at eye level with her, and explained the situation in short, clear sentences, pausing to let the universal chip catch up with the translation. She listened without moving. When he finished, she said, "What do you intend to do?" "There is a debris field," he said. "About 40 minutes from here, at current speed. Old collision site. Been there for about 80 years. It is registered as a navigation hazard. No sensible pilot takes a ship through it." She looked at him. "I am not a sensible pilot," he said. "I am a salvager. I grew up flying through things that navigation systems tell you to avoid. The Kareth's Pursuit AI will model our probable behavior and plot intercept courses based on it. It is very good at that. What it is not good at is modeling a flight path that has no rational basis. You are going to fly through it in a way that makes no sense," she said. "In a way that makes no sense to a computer," he said. "It will make sense to me." She studied him for a moment. "You could be wrong," she said. "Often," he agreed. "But I'm usually right about flying." She nodded once, which he was beginning to understand was her version of all, "Right, let's do it." He went back to the pilot's seat. The debris field was a ragged spread of material from a freighter collision that had happened in a contested shipping lane 3 generations back. Over 80 years, the pieces had drifted and tumbled into a rough cloud about 60,000 kilometers across. Some pieces were the size of pebbles, some were the size of houses. None of it was predictable. Navigation systems hated it because their models required predictability. The debris moved, slowly, and the movement fed back into the movement of every piece around it, and the result was a constantly shifting puzzle that no algorithm could fully map in real time. Joran had been through it twice before, looking for salvage. He had found decent material both times, and come out with only moderate new damage to the hull. He understood its logic, which was not really a logic at all, but more of a feeling. The way a piece of debris moved, the way a gap opened and closed, the way you felt the field around you as a kind of pressure that you steered with your gut rather than your instruments. He entered it at an angle that no approach vector optimization would ever recommend. The Rustward shuddered immediately as a basketball-sized fragment clipped the forward sensor housing. The mid-range alert triggered, which was funny timing. He banked hard left without announcing it, dropped the nose 30 degrees, and then brought it back up in a lazy curve that put them between 2 tumbling slabs of hull plating from the old freighter, each one twice the size of his ship. Behind them, the Hunter drone followed them into the field. He watched it on the visual scanner. It was good. It was faster than him and more agile, and it was doing an admirable job of tracking his movements. But it was also running a predictive model. He could see it in the way it moved, always a fraction of a second behind him, always calculating where he was going to go, rather than watching where he was actually going. He stopped going where he was going to go. He flew sideways. Not a banking turn, actually sideways, using the maneuvering thrusters in a combination that the ship's own control system tried to correct for, and that he had to override manually. It was uncomfortable. The inertial compensators had not been designed for this. Ava Say's broth bowl probably ended up somewhere on the floor. He flew sideways into a gap between 3 rotating pieces of debris, none of which should have contained a gap large enough for the Rustward's profile, and in fact did not. Quite. So the ship's starboard side scraped metal with a sound that went through the hull like a bell and made something in the cargo bay fall over. The hunter drone tried to follow. It calculated the gap's dimensions. It calculated the ship's profile. It determined that the maneuver was geometrically marginal and decided to take a safer path around the outside of the debris cluster. Joran was already gone. He spent the next 22 minutes doing things in the debris field that he would not have wanted to do on a calm day, with a full inspection behind him and no immediate threat to his life. The starboard scrape was joined by a new dent in the upper hull, and the loss of one external antenna array that had been working intermittently anyway. The Rustward groaned in a way that was less structural complaint and more old friend expressing deep concerns. He kept flying. He came out the far side of the field in a direction that had no logical relationship to the direction he had entered it. He sat back and let out a long breath and checked the scanner. The hunter drone was not behind him. He swept the area twice and found no signal. He waited. 10 minutes. 15. Nothing. He got up and walked back to the crew area. Ava Say was sitting exactly where he had left her, which suggested either very good core strength or that she had gripped something very hard for the past 20 minutes and refused to let go. The broth bowl was, in fact, on the floor. Her expression was composed in the careful way of someone who had decided to be composed as an act of will. "Well," she said, through the chip, "you fly like you are injured." "That's the point," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He had noticed that she did this, held eye contact longer than felt comfortable to most people, as if she were reading something in his face that he could not read himself. "They will send more than a drone," she said. "Yes," he said. "A ship. Possibly more than one." "Almost certainly," he said. "And you intend to continue." He picked the broth bowl up off the floor and set it back on the container beside her. "I intend to fly you to your people," he said. "That is what I intend." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she did not look at him. She looked at the wall of the ship, at the patched plating, and the mismatched panels, and the evidence of 100 small repairs made by someone who refused to let things stay broken. "The data I carry," she said, "contains the location of the Lurin Sanctuary, a world, a hidden place where my people went at the end, 40,000 of them, in cryosleep, waiting." He had known this from before they left Keth Station, she had told him, but hearing it again, now, in the quiet after the debris field, with the reality of what they were doing settling into the space around them, it landed differently. 40,000 people, sleeping, waiting for 200 years for someone to find them. "They are still alive?" he asked. "The sanctuary was designed to maintain cryostasis indefinitely," she said. "Yes, if it was not found and destroyed, yes. And you were the one who knew where it was." "I was the one who survived to carry the knowledge," she said. "There were others, we each carried different pieces. I do not know if any of them were ever found. I have been asleep. I do not know what 200 years looks like from the outside." She paused. "It is a very long time," she said, "to be alone in the dark." Joran sat down on the cargo crate he had pulled into the crew area earlier. He did not say anything. There was nothing useful he could say, and he was a person who had learned, over many years, that silence was sometimes the most respectful thing you could offer. They sat together in the quiet of the Rustward, with the stars moving slowly past the small viewing port, and the ship around them ticking and settling in the way old ships do, when no one is asking them to do anything terrible. After a while, he got up and reheated more broth, because she needed to eat, and that was something he could do. The message came from Kareth Command 16 hours later. It was not addressed to Joran specifically. It was a broadband transmission, sent on every open frequency in the sector, in 43 languages. He picked it up on the Rustward's communications array, while he was running a systems check on the starboard hull sensor, the one that had survived the debris field scrape with only minor damage, and for a moment, he just read the translated text on the screen and said nothing. The Kareth Dominion was declaring him a biological insurgent, not a criminal, not a violator of salvage law, an insurgent. The charge carried a response authorization that meant any Kareth vessel in range was cleared to intercept and destroy without prior contact. The broadcast also included a secondary message, directed at every recognized faction, trading organization, and independent station in the sector. It was worded carefully, in the polished language of diplomacy, and it said, with great precision and clarity, that any entity which aided or sheltered the occupants of the ship, designated as the Rustword, would be considered in violation of Kareth Dominion territorial agreements and subject to review and sanction. Joran read it twice. He went to the communications panel and tried 4 different contacts. A trading post he had done business with for years, a station where he knew the operations manager personally, a salvage network dispatch he had been a registered member of for a decade, and a fixer on a border station who owed him a favor that Joran had been saving for a real emergency. The trading post did not respond. The station operations manager's channel returned a service unavailable notice. The salvage network dispatch responded with an automated message, informing him that his registration had been temporarily suspended pending review. The fixer's channel connected, went quiet for 5 seconds, and then disconnected. He sat in front of the communications panel and looked at the silence. He was not surprised. He understood why each of those entities had made the choice they made, and he did not blame them. The Kareth Dominion was not a small power that could be defied without cost. It controlled shipping lanes and resources, and agreements that touched every corner of the sector. Standing against it for the sake of one man on a broken salvage ship was a rational thing to refuse. He was alone. He had known this was likely when they left Keth Station. He had made the calculation then, not in numbers, but in the quiet part of himself that made decisions before the thinking part caught up. He was still here. The calculation had not changed. He pulled up the navigation charts. The Veil corridor was marked on every chart he had with a large warning symbol and the notation, Unmapped Gravitational Anomaly Zone. Navigation systems non-functional. The notation had been there for 3,000 years. It had been added, presumably, by whoever had been the first to try to map it and failed. It had never been updated because no one had gone back. No one had gone back because you could not navigate it with a navigation system. The gravitational anomalies were not consistent. They shifted. They overlapped. They created pockets and currents that changed faster than any AI could model. Standard navigation AI required predictability. The Veil corridor did not offer it. Joran had read about it in 3 different salvage logs from crews who had gotten close to the boundary and turned back. He had found the logs interesting in the way he found most impossible things interesting, which was to say he had read them carefully and stored the information in the part of his mind where useful things were kept. He pulled up the old logs now and read through them again. Ava Say came and stood behind him. She had recovered enough to move around the ship carefully, one hand trailing along the wall for support. She read the charts over his shoulder for a moment. The Veil corridor, she said. That is where the sanctuary is, he said. Yes, past it, he said, which means through it. The Kareth never went in, she said. That is why we chose it. They are very logical. The corridor cannot be navigated logically. No, he agreed. It cannot. She watched him. Can you navigate it? I don't know, he said. I've never tried. That is an honest answer, she said. I find them more useful than the other kind, he said. He looked at the charts for another moment. The Silence Fleet, 14 warships, the broadcast had been specific, was being assembled at a staging point that the Kareth's own communication had named, apparently not concerned about secrecy since they believed there was nowhere he could go that they could not follow. The staging point was between him and the corridor entrance. He would have to go around, the long way. 3 days of flying, pushing the Rustword's single good thruster as hard as it would take being pushed. The radiation warnings on the corridor's boundary charts were significant. They were the kind of warnings that made a medical professional write lists. He was not a medical professional. He noted the warnings, mapped the route around the staging point, and started flying. He did not tell Avasay about the radiation warnings immediately. He told himself this was because there was nothing either of them could do about it at this stage, and the information would only cause concern without providing any actionable alternative. This was true. It was also true that he was aware she had already carried too much weight for too long, and he did not want to add to it before he had to. He told her on the second day. She found out because the radiation counter on the ship's environmental system, a basic unit, installed by a previous owner, started ticking up as they approached the corridor boundary, and she asked him what the sound was. He explained. She was very still for a moment. Then she said, "You knew. From the charts, yes. And you did not tell me. I was going to. When? When it became information you could use rather than information that would only worry you," he said. She looked at him with the long, steady look he had come to understand was her way of reading a person's honesty. Then she said, "You are trying to protect me." "I'm trying to be useful," he said. "It is the same thing," she said. "I do not need protecting." "I know," he said. "I'm not protecting you from the danger. I'm protecting you from knowing about the danger before it matters. There's a difference." She considered this. "Among my people," she said, "that distinction would be called very poor reasoning." "Among my people," he said, "it would be called being practical." She looked like she was going to argue. Then she looked at the radiation counter, and the charts and the route he had plotted, and whatever she had been going to say, she kept to herself. "How long before it affects you seriously?" she asked. "Depends on the exposure level inside the corridor," he said. "The boundary readings are manageable. Inside is the question. And if it becomes serious, then we will deal with it," he said. "I have a first aid kit." She said something in her own language that the chip did not translate. He got the impression it was not complimentary, but she sat down in the co-pilot's seat, which she had not done before, and she watched the corridor boundary approach, and she did not tell him to turn around. He appreciated that. He entered the veil corridor at a speed that made the environmental system produce a soft alarm that he silenced with one hand without looking at it. The corridor received them. It was not what he had expected, which was turbulence and chaos. The gravitational effects were subtle at first, small pulls and deflections that registered on the ship's inertial sensors as minor course drift, the kind of thing you corrected almost without thinking. But they were constant, and they were always changing. He could not model them. He could not predict them. He had to feel them the way you feel a current in water, and respond to them faster than thinking. He had been doing exactly this kind of thing his entire adult life. He flew with both hands on the manual controls, and the navigation AI completely disengaged, because it kept trying to correct for anomalies in ways that would have sent them into a gravitational pocket from which there would have been no exit. He flew by the seat of his pants, and by the particular kind of tired focus that comes from needing to get something done and not having any option but to do it. The radiation counter climbed. He did not look at it. On the second hour in the corridor, something happened to the ship that he could not immediately explain. A deep, resonant vibration that moved through the hull from stern to bow and made every loose object in the cargo bay rattle. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then stopped. He checked everything he could check, and found nothing obviously wrong, but he noted it. Eva Say, beside him, had one hand flat against the hull paneling in a way that looked like she was feeling the ship through her palm. "It is not damaged," she said. "How do you know?" he asked. "I do not know exactly," she said. "I can feel it. The structure. It is whole." He looked at her. "My people had certain sensitivities," she said, "to materials, to states of things. I have not had cause to use them in a long time." She paused. "A very long time." "Can you feel the corridor?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "In a way, it is like listening to very large music." He thought about that. "Does it tell you anything useful?" She tilted her head. "Go slightly left," she said. He went slightly left. 3 seconds later, the visual scanner showed him a gravitational shear that would have pushed them off course by nearly 40 degrees if they had held their heading. He looked at her. "Keep flying," she said. "I will tell you when." They flew the corridor together, him with his hands and his gut, and 9 years of flying broken ships through impossible spaces. Her with whatever sense she had that could hear the shape of something he could only feel. They did not talk much. They did not need to. The corridor was loud enough, in its own way, and the work was everything. He was aware of the radiation counter in the way you are aware of something you have decided not to look at. It was there. It was climbing. He felt it in the back of his head and his hands, and the slow start of a headache that was not from the tension of flying. He flew. She said left or right or down or hold, in a calm, steady voice that never wavered, and he moved the ship accordingly, and the corridor let them through. They came out on the other side. It was not dramatic. There was no visible boundary. The gravitational interference faded, the vibrations quieted, and suddenly, the scanner was reading clean space ahead, and the navigation AI, when he re-engaged it, found its position without difficulty and updated the charts. He let out a breath. He felt very tired. His hands, when he took them off the controls, had a faint tremor that he noted and ignored. "We are through," Ava Say said. She was looking at the view screen, at the stars ahead. "We are," he said. She was quiet for a moment, then she pointed. "There," she said. "That direction. Approximately 6 hours at your current speed." He adjusted course. "Joran," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the chip prompting it. "Look at me." He looked at her. She studied his face with the long, reading look. "You need medical attention," she said. "I need a rest," he said. "You need more than a rest." "After we get there," he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she said, "After we get there, yes." She turned back to the view screen. He set the autopilot for the heading she had given him, leaned back in the pilot's seat, and let the ship carry them forward through the clean dark. He smelled the sanctuary before he saw it, not literally. You cannot smell anything through the vacuum of space, but the word kept coming to him, as the planet resolved on the visual scanner, growing from a point of reflected light into a shape with depth and color. The smell of something that had been sealed for a long time and was about to be opened, the particular quality of waiting that hangs in the air of rooms that have not been entered for years. The planet was small and blue-green, wrapped in thin cloud cover. No industrial signatures, no energy emissions on the standard bands, nothing that would attract attention or show up on a routine scan as anything other than an uninhabited world. Ava Say had not moved from the co-pilot's seat for the last 3 hours of the approach. She was watching the view screen with an expression that Joran did not have the right language to describe. It was too old and too large for any single word he knew. "It is exactly as I remember it," she said quietly. "You've been here before," he said. "I brought the last group here," she said. "I helped build the facility. I put people into the chambers myself, and then I went to the pod to carry the location to those who would come." She paused. "I expected it to take perhaps 20 years, perhaps 30. Someone would find the data. The Kareth would be weakened by then. The timing would be right." 200 years, he said. 200 years, she said. Yes. He thought about what it meant to plan a rescue that was supposed to take a generation, and instead took 10. He thought about what it meant to wake up and not know which century you were in, or whether the people you had sealed in those chambers were still there, or whether the world itself was still where you had left it. He did not say any of this. He flew toward the planet. They entered the atmosphere with the Rustward's heat shielding doing its job adequately, which was all he asked of it anymore. The landing site was where Ava Say directed him, a broad plateau on the planet's northern hemisphere, flat and firm, with what looked like ordinary rock formation around the edges, but which she identified as the exterior concealment of the facility entrance. He set the Rustward down as gently as a ship in its condition could be set down, which was not very gently but without anything breaking. The engines cycled down. The cargo bay pressure equalized with the outside atmosphere. Ava Say had confirmed it was breathable before they landed. The exterior sensors showed quiet, cool air, light wind, nothing on any scanner suggesting they had been followed through the corridor. He was not naive enough to think the Silence Fleet had simply given up. He had made a decision about that problem before they entered the corridor, and he had spent part of the flight through it, putting that decision into action, working quietly on the communications system, while Ava Say guided them between gravitational hazards. He had written it all down, every record she had shared with him, the full history of the Luran Purge, as she had told it to him in pieces over the past several days, the coordinates of the sanctuary, the names of the Kareth commanders who had planned and executed the purge, documented in Ava Say's own encoded memory, and transcribed through the universal chip into a format his ship's system could store. Everything. He had loaded it into the Rustword's communications buffer, set to broadcast on every open frequency in the sector the moment he triggered it. The Kareth could not destroy information that was already everywhere. He triggered it now, from the planet's surface, before they stepped outside the ship. The broadcast went out. He watched the confirmation on the screen, showing him the expanding wave of signal, sector-wide. He did not know what would happen next. He knew that the Kareth could no longer stop this with force, because force could not reach a signal already received by 1,000 different stations, ships, and systems across the sector. They could still come here. They could still try. But the logic of concealment and silence that had allowed the purge to be buried for 200 years was gone now. Whatever they did next, everyone would know it. He shut the communications panel down. He sat for a moment in the pilot's seat. His hands were steadier than they had been at the end of the corridor. He had taken the medication from the first aid kit that most closely matched what the radiation counter was telling him to take, and it had helped enough that he did not feel the need to mention it again. Ava Say was standing at the cargo bay door. She had her hand on the release. She was not looking at him, but at the door, as if she were bracing herself for something. "Ready?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. He understood that. Ready was the wrong word. There was no word for what she was at this moment, standing at the door of a ship on a planet she had not touched in 200 years, about to walk into a room full of everyone she had ever known and wake them up. She opened the door. The air came in. It was cool and clean and smelled like nothing he had a name for, something mineral and faintly living, the smell of a world that had been left alone long enough to become entirely itself. Ava Say stepped down from the cargo bay onto the rock of the plateau. She stood very still. He climbed down after her and stood a few meters away. She knelt down and put both palms flat against the rock. She stayed like that for a moment. He watched her and did not speak. Then she stood up and walked toward the formation at the plateau's edge, and he followed her. The entrance to the facility was exactly where she said it would be. It was sealed, but the sealing mechanism responded to her. He understood, vaguely, that her biological signature was part of the access protocol, a living key, stored in her cells alongside the data she had carried for 200 years. The entrance opened slowly, revealing a descending passage with lighting that activated as they walked, amber and steady, reaching ahead of them into the deep. The facility was vast. He had not quite understood the scale of 40,000 cryochambers until he saw them, rows and rows in a space that had been carved from the rock of the planet itself, extending further than he could see from the entrance. The chambers were all closed, all functioning. The air inside was cold and perfectly still, the temperature maintained by systems that had been running without interruption since before he was born. Ava Say walked among the chambers slowly. She touched some of them as she passed. He walked behind her and gave her the space she needed. She stopped at a chamber near the front of the first row. She looked at the identification panel on its face. Then she turned to Joran and said, "I need your help. The waking sequence requires 2 people. My people designed it this way on purpose. They did not want anyone to wake alone." He stepped forward. "Tell me what to do," he said. She showed him. It took both of them, working in careful coordination, following a sequence she knew from memory, and explained to him as they went. He listened and did exactly what she told him, no more and no less. The chamber opened. The person inside was an older man, older in the physical sense, with the fine angular features of the Lurin, and a stillness that shifted, slowly, into motion, as the cryostasis released. The first breath was small and shallow. The second was stronger. The eyes opened. He looked at Ava Say. Something passed between them that Joran could not read and did not try to. Then the man looked at Joran. He took in the face, the build, the clothing. He said something to Ava Say. His voice was thin but steady. She answered. The conversation was short. "He asks what you are," she told Joran. "Human," Joran said. She relayed this. The man looked at him for a long time. Then he said something else. He says, Ava Say translated, that he has read of humans, a very young species, very new to the larger world. He asks how a human came to be here. Joran thought about how to answer that. He thought about a dead tech heap in a bad-smelling market, and a broken scanner, and one credit, and an 11-minute sequence of sounds that he could not walk away from. I bought something cheap, he said, and it turned out to be worth more than I knew. She translated this. The old man looked at Joran with the same long, reading look that Ava Say had used on him from the very beginning. Then he said something brief. He says, Ava Say said, and her voice was very quiet, that some things have more value than the price suggests, and that the one who sees it is worth more than the thing itself. Joran did not know what to do with that. He looked at the rows of chambers extending away into the distance. He looked at the amber light on the ceiling. He looked at Ava Say, who was watching him with the expression he still did not have a word for. There is a lot of work ahead, he said. Yes, she said, there is. You are going to need supplies, communication equipment, someone to negotiate with the factions when the broadcast starts producing reactions, and it will. Yes, she said. I know some people, he said. Not the ones I called before. Different people, further out. People who do not have much to lose with the Kareth, and a reasonable amount to gain from being on the right side of history. She watched him. I am going to need to go back out eventually, he said, to get things you need. It might take time. Joran, she said. Yes. You are trying to tell me that you will come back, she said. He paused. Yes, he said, I am. She was quiet. She turned back to look at the chamber, where the old man was still slowly orienting himself to the fact that he was alive and the world was still there. She looked at the rows beyond. 40,000, she said. And every one of them waking up not knowing what year it is, or what has happened, or whether anyone is coming. I know, he said. They will be frightened, she said. Yes, he said. You were the first person I saw when I woke, she said. I did not know what you were. I did not know if I could trust you. I said you were a fool. You said thank you after, he reminded her. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that he was beginning to identify as her version of a smile. Yes, she said. I did. She looked at him. Will you stay until the others are waking? Until they have someone to see? He looked at the rows. He thought about the medical cabinet on the rustward, and the radiation counter, and the first aid kit, and the practical limits of those things. Yes, he said. I will stay. She nodded once. They went to the next chamber together, and she showed him the sequence again, and he did exactly what she told him to do, and the light in the facility was amber and steady, and outside on the surface of the planet, the rustward sat quiet on the rock with its broadcast still echoing through the sector, carrying a story 200 years overdue, in the direction of every ear in the known galaxy. 40,000 people were coming home. He had bought a lifeless pod for 1 credit. He had made, without question, the best purchase of his life.